Hey, good afternoon. It's Jason from Fraser Valley Rose Farm. Today I want to talk about growing roses in pots or growing roses in containers. And I get this question an awful lot when talking to customers at the farmer's market. They buy a rose from me, but the next question they ask is, can I grow this in a pot? And of course, I'm selling it to them in a pot, so the smart-ass answer is yes. I think the question they're asking is, can it be grown in a pot long-term? And my answer is still yes, but now I owe you an explanation. You see, I'd really like it if more people grew their roses in pots for a longer period of time. I want to show you a couple things here. So this here is a rose that I propagated last year from cuttings. Just tip it out of its tray here. It's well rooted, but it's basically grown from last summer until this spring in this tiny little pot. And now it's ready for an up pot to the next size. And the next size here is this one here, and I up-potted this one just a couple of months ago. So I want to show you, it's actually nice and stable in the pot here. And if I tip this one out, I'm going to find that it too is rooted to the bottom of the pot. Now, if somebody buys this from me at the farmer's market, just potted a couple months ago, do I want them to put it into the ground right away? I would actually prefer they grow it on for a little while. I'd love to see this one put on some new shoots. I'd love to see it get stronger, thicker shoots. I'd love to see it root even firmer into that pot before they put it into the garden. So what should they do with this? I'd say water it, add some fertilizer to it, grow it on even for another year on your patio, on your deck, on your balcony, and enjoy the rose for a while. Live with it for a while. See how it looks on you. You don't want to grow it in this boring nursery pot here. Very easy solution to that. Just grab an outer container like this one here. They sell in most of the hardware stores, most of the garden centers, they sell pots like these that are really just intended to nest these 1 gallon pots inside of. So you just put it in there, and it actually shields the outside of the pot from sunlight so it doesn't warm up excessively, so it moderates the soil temperature a little bit for you, and you can grow this on for another year. So this one out of the way, let's assume you've done that. Let's assume you grew it on for another year, and now you've got a bigger rose like this that is like super well rooted into the ground, into the pot here, and you're wondering what to do with it. Well, now you have options, and it's the same option you have every time your rose reaches a point where it's actually drying out quickly between waterings. It's grown large in comparison to the size of the pot. And your options are, do I pot it up to a larger pot? Do I put it in the ground in my garden? Or do I stop growing this variety? Maybe you don't like it anymore. Maybe it's not, it doesn't suit you so much. I mean, I like this rose, but tastes change over time, and you've given yourself a year to sort of consider it and live with it. So you take this, and let's say you pot it up to the next size. I can give you containers that will nest a 2 gallon pot. So I'll show you a clip here of me putting it into a 2 gallon pot. Also, you can grow all the way up to a 5 gallon pot. So that might last you 2 or 3 or 4 years of growing this rose in pots, in your container, on your patio, on your deck, where you live outside is fine. And every time you get that choice, do I want to pot it up? Do I want to put it in the ground? Or do I want to give my rose away because I want to try something new? And I like this approach to gardening. I like this approach to container gardening. I'll tell you more about how to do the container gardening here, but I like the approach because it acknowledges that the fundamental nature of gardening is that we manage change. Your plant will change over time. It's going to grow. It's going to need more things or different things. And also, you're going to change. Your tastes will change in gardening. And so the idea that you're buying something as a permanent fixture in your garden may not be all that realistic anyway. So let's talk about what your roses will need while they're in a container like this one, or any of the larger sizes that I'm showing you here. All right, I may slip up from time to time and talk about the soil that you need to use inside of your potting. And the truth is, this does not resemble soil. If you dug up garden soil from your yard, put it into a pot like this one here, and tried to use that to pot your roses, it would both be too heavy and it wouldn't have the right qualities. It wouldn't drain its water well enough. It wouldn't retain water well enough for the roses that you want to grow. So what we're using is actually a soilless mix, and what that is depends a little bit on where you're buying your soil. Locally here, I did a whole other video on how I use potting soil that's made out of wood chips or wood bark or composted wood products. And That's great for my potting in my greenhouse. But if you're just trying to pot for containers in the home, you don't want to buy it in bulk. You probably go to something like this, which is a Soilless mix. This one is made out of peat moss and perlite. You can buy this from locally here from Pro Mix or Sunshine Mix, and you can see that it's quite light because they've mixed it with the peat product, and they've also mixed in perlite, and they've got some lime in there and something to help it to retain water or not shed water. So that's what this is made out of. But again, whatever your mix is, it has to be light, it has to retain water, and it has to drain properly, which seems like a strange mix of things you're asking from your Soilless mix. What it is in your local area, I mean, it might be rice hulls and coconut fiber where you are, but ask at your local nursery, a garden center, or hardware store for a mix that's suitable for container gardening, and that's what you're looking for. The other thing I use is, hang on, I'll get some frills here. This is my slow release fertilizer, and in terms of what fertilizer to put into your rose pots, I like slow release chemical fertilizer because I get something very predictable. If you tried to use organic fertilizer into pots, if you're good at that and you know a lot about it, I'm sure you could find a way to make that work for you. For beginners, or even, I'm a professional grower and I still use the slow release fertilizer. Brand names for that here might be Osmocote or Basicote or Multicote or Floracote. The COTE on the end usually implies that it's coated to give you a controlled release in your fertilizer. I integrate some of that into the soil as I do my potting. You gotta be careful how much you put in. It is always better for you to under-fertilize than to over-fertilize. So look at the recommendations. You can go on the low end or on the medium end. I certainly wouldn't try the high end, even though roses are heavy feeders, because you always have the option later on of doing a liquid feed on the foliage and through the top of the pot, or adding more fertilizer later. So I usually err on the side of fertilizing lower, because that's much less damaging to the plant if you get it wrong. Now, how often should you water your rose? That's not a question I can answer for you easily, because obviously this one here that's like super well rooted and got a ton of top growth is going to empty out of water. It's going to transpire its water through the leaves of the plant way faster than that other one that I showed you. That's just been in a pot for a couple of months. The one that's only been in the pot for a couple of months, I only water that twice a week. This one here, every day or two I have to water that well. Otherwise, I'm going to see major signs of wilting in my roses, and that's a good signal now that this is ready to go into a larger pot. So if you're wondering about when's the right timing to consider putting your roses into a larger pot. So I guess to sum it up, when you keep a rose in a pot, in a container, what you're doing is you're replacing all the functions of nature in terms of watering and feeding that rose, and obviously you'll be taking care of it the same way you would normally, with pruning and deadheading and so on. So where should you place your roses in containers? Anywhere you want. That's the beauty of having them in pots. You can put them wherever you want, on your deck or on your patio, on your balcony, around your yard, and see how they perform. And in general, roses do like full sun exposure, but full sun really includes anything 6 hours and upwards of sun a day. So you can play around with it a little bit. I find that my roses really appreciate, especially during the hot portion of summer. I mean, remember, they're in containers, so they're going to suffer moisture stress a little bit easier than your roses on the landscape. So if they get a little bit of afternoon shade, that usually helps them out quite a lot. One other note I'll say about it is that if you're overwintering your roses in containers, I like to tuck them away somewhere outside of the direct flow of moisture from above and wind from the side. Usually in our climate, I get those hard winter winds. So if you can tuck them against the eaves of the house, into an unheated garage, I use my unheated greenhouse, that will usually help them to overwinter a little bit better. All right, the one last point I'd like to make about growing roses in containers is that even though many companies, when they're selling roses for container gardening, they're trying to sell you miniatures or patio style roses, they may call them, or small floribundas or shrubs, and I won't argue the point. Those smaller roses are easier to manage in containers, but if you continue to upgrade the pot size, it opens up a way wider array of roses to you. So if you wanted to grow a climber, if you wanted to grow a large hybrid tea or shrub, or even a species rose on your patio or in your outdoor gardening space, but grow it in a pot, you just have to continue to upgrade that size of the pot. But that doesn't really intimidate me too much. I often go to the garden center and see them growing big trees in like 50-gallon pots and so on. So it's not something that is unknown, and I'd love to see you push the envelope on what you can grow on your container. And the only downside, which there is none, is that if you keep it in a pot for a long time and you eventually decide that this rose needs to go into the ground, by the time you put it in the ground, it's going to be a much larger, more robust, more well-rooted rose, and it's just going to do better in the ground. So there's no downside there. All right, thanks so much for listening today. If you have any questions or further technique questions about what to do with roses in pots, just hit me up in the comments below this video. Thanks so much for watching.